I'm Weade. Today on the Purpose-Based Retirement, we're going to be discussing retirement tips for women. Whether you're married, divorced, or widowed, there's some things that you might want to keep in mind for your retirement future, especially some important planning tips you're not going to want to miss out on. Later in the show, we're going to take questions from people just like you. We've got questions about mortgages and whether we should be getting a mortgage at the age of 67. In addition, we're going to talk about interest rates. What does a rising interest rate environment mean to the bonds in your portfolio? And should you be waiting or should you be buying into this interest rate environment today?
Welcome to the Purpose-Based Retirement with certified financial planner practitioner Weade.
It's not how much we make during the good times, it's how much we keep during those really bad times.
Casey leads a team of financial advisors with decades of experience, helping families across the country retire with the confidence they deserve. The Purpose-Based Retirement assigns every dollar you've saved a specific purpose to meet a key retirement need.
Whatever risk you faced, we've got a plan for that.
Stay tuned and learn how you can look forward to a worry-free, purpose-based retirement.
Thanks for joining us again. I am Lee Kelso here with Weade, certified financial planner. He's also the president of Howard Bailey Financial. Today's program is going to begin with lots of good advice for women. Now, Casey, I know that you're a huge advocate for having women be very involved in planning their couple's retirement plan.
Well, whether it's men or women, I think if there's a couple, they both need to be involved in the overall financial plan. The unfortunate reality is that most of the time, the individuals that we're sitting down with are males. You know, they are the ones that are coming in and typically doing the financial planning. Now, I can tell you about a lot of women I've worked with that are very astute in the financial world. It's just unfortunately few and far between. And there are special challenges that women are going to face in the future that men typically aren't, on average anyways. I can say person after person comes in, I see that, I've seen widowed women that come in trying to pick up the pieces and not knowing what their financial plan was, not only not knowing what the financial plan was, but where the money was in the first place. And this is on average what's going to happen. The average woman is going to be left single at some point in their lives. So why not be part of the overall financial planning process, or at least have a good idea of where things are and what we do in case something were to occur. And I think there's some points that we need to walk through to make sure that women are really prepared for this stage of their life, retirement.
So let's begin with one of the most important, and that is if you're lucky enough to have a pension in your life, you need to have a special consideration there, right?
Yeah, well, we need to make sure that we have a survivor's pension. So there's a lot of different options when there's a pension option chosen by a spouse. That could be single life, it could be 10 years certain, it could be joint with 50% to the survivor. But 9 times out of 10, if not 99% of the time, what we should be choosing as the man that's choosing this pension is we should be choosing that joint survivor option. And in order to determine if this is really the case, we need to figure out what types of expenses are going to change at the loss of one spouse. And at that point in our life, say at 70, 75, 80, we don't see a big change in our expenses. Typically, we've downsized by then. We don't have a mortgage. Maybe we only have one car even. Our expenses don't change dramatically when we lose a spouse, but our income can. And so you want to make sure that you really understand how your income is going to change. What income is going to stay the same? What income is going to change when you lose that spouse? I can tell you one thing, you're going to lose a Social Security benefit. You're going to lose a smaller of the two. If your Social Security benefits are relatively close to one another, that can be a pretty dramatic pullback in income at the loss of the first spouse. I've got a gal that we worked with and we implemented a plan for a number of years ago that recently lost her spouse. Her expenses actually went up. Moved out to Arizona. She goes out. She enjoys going out on the town and having a good time and playing a lot more golf than she ever played before. She's spending more than she spent in the past. We had a plan for that. We were prepared for that. We lost not only a Social Security, but they filed for that pension before we had a chance to advise on it, and they did choose a single life pension option. But we're drawing a lot more income from the portfolio in order to make everything happen in her life, a significant amount more. You have to stress test the plan. One of the things that we do in our office is, this kind of sounds morbid, but we can kill kill one of the two spouses and see what happens. What happens if we lose one of the two spouses? We can see what happens to our income, what happens to our expenses, and what happens to our assets, and include health care provisions in that as well.
So an important element that many people don't think about, but it's critical, and that is to check your beneficiary designation. Explain that.
This might seem strange, but you want to check those beneficiary designations. And I say it seems strange because you'd think this would be common sense, but a lot of folks believe that their will is going to take care of everything. Well, I've got a will. Why do I need beneficiary designations? Your beneficiary designations will bypass whatever's said in the will. Your beneficiary designations are going to lead the charge in the case of death. There was a story not that long ago about a couple where they had beneficiary designations established, and the husband passed away. The husband hadn't updated those beneficiary designations after his previous divorce and remarriage to his new wife. That one of those assets that he had, a substantial one, this ended up in court for a number of years, and the spouse at the time of death lost to the ex-spouse because the ex-spouse was the one that was still designated as the beneficiary. Every single time we sit down and do reviews with our clients, every 3 or 4 months, we're reviewing their beneficiaries and making sure everything's in order.
It is that important. What should I be concerned about if I am divorced?
Yeah, well, if you're divorced, I think there's some neat things that you can do when it comes to your Social Security benefits. Now, you have to be married for at least 10 years, and if you're married for at least 10 years, you have the ability to utilize some of the subsidization that the Social Security Administration has really done when it comes to Social Security planning. There were some things in 2015, the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2015 was supposed to eliminate unintended loopholes in Social Security planning. Well, for divorcees, they didn't close those loopholes. So my parents fall into that bucket, and we were able to do some really neat planning where mom was able to pick up several $1,000s a year that she wouldn't have had otherwise because they were divorced. She was able to file for her spousal benefits, delay her own benefits till later. Those file and suspend rules don't work for individuals that aren't divorced, though.
So that's divorcees. What about widows? Special considerations there?
Well, there are also special considerations for widows. You're going to see some of the same things for divorcees. However, now you can claim for your benefits as early as 60. And I've actually had couples that I've worked with where they didn't know this. I had a gal I sat down with that hadn't filed for Social Security yet because she thought she had to wait till age 62. She missed out on a year's worth of Social Security benefits she could have had earlier.
What about women who may not be in the workplace? They may not have access to an IRA. What considerations there?
Yeah, well, open a spousal IRA. Even though you're not in the workforce, maybe you don't have W-2 income, you don't have working income, you can utilize your spouse's income in order to make those contributions to an IRA and still get that tax deduction. As we approach the end of the year, this is a good time to take advantage of those things. If you haven't yet, well, go ahead and take a look and say, well, have I made contributions, your Roth IRA or your traditional IRA for the year, $5,500 per individual, and an extra $1,000 if you're over the age of 50? That could be a huge deduction or opportunity that you're missing out on every year if you're not taking advantage of having both your income earning spouse having an IRA and also your spousal IRA for the non-income producing spouse.
Well, there's lots of things to think about if you find yourself either as a single woman or just wanting to know more about what's happening in your life financially. So I hope you'll be one of the next 10 people to pick up the phone and give us a call, because we're offering a complimentary review of your entire financial and retirement plan. We're going to take a look at exactly what it's costing you to work with your current advisor, fees that you may not know about. We'll start developing a tax strategy so you can keep more of what you make, and then take a look toward a long-term income plan so that you can spend confidently in retirement knowing the money is there and you're not going to outlive it. All those things are factors in a purpose-based retirement, and you can get started on yours by making a phone call and being one of the next 10 people to seek an appointment with Casey or a member of the Howard Bailey team and start working on that purpose-based retirement. We're right back in just a second. We'll be answering your questions. Stay with us.
At Howard Bailey Financial, every dollar has a purpose. We call it the purpose-based retirement. A certified financial planner will help you decide what you need your retirement money to do for you. We put together a written plan that puts your dollars exactly where you want them to be. And we put every dollar to work to maximize your retirement efficiency. For a higher level of insight and care, choose the purpose-based retirement from Howard Bailey Financial. Call us now to set a complimentary consultation.
You need a plan to create the retirement you deserve. The first step is to tune in to the Purpose-Based Retirement Radio Hour with Casey Weade and Marshall Johnson. Saturdays at 11 a.m. and Sundays at 1 p.m. on WOWO 107.5 FM or Sunday mornings at 11 on 95.3 MNC.
Welcome back to the program. We're here to answer your questions in this segment. Each week we take questions from viewers. You can mail those to info@thepurposebasedretirement.com. We're going to begin this segment with Sam in Rome City.
With concerns with rising interest rates now, is now a good time for me to switch out my bond funds for individual bonds?
You know, Sam, it very well might be. I think we're strongly encouraging individuals to pay close attention to the bond funds that they own and really scrutinize those with as much detail as possible to really understand what your risks are when it comes to those bond funds. And there's risks that can potentially be eliminated, as you said, by moving from bond funds over to individual bonds. We're going to cover some of those risks here later in the show, but for those other individuals out there that might be wondering, well, what are the risks with bond funds in this environment? Well, over the last 30 plus years, interest rates have been falling, and as interest rates fall, bond prices rise. Now, if we see that curve change and interest rates begin to rise, now bond prices could fall. The longer term bonds that you have, the more they're going to get hurt in this rising interest rate environment. And now if we switch those bond funds out for individual bonds, now we eliminate that potential risk for the price risk itself. Now, if we buy a 10-year bond and we're going to get 4% a year for the next 10 years. Now, we don't care what the value of that bond does over the next few years, because after that 10-year period, or if it gets called, then we're going to get back our original investment upon liquidation and our interest in the interim. So we eliminate a lot of that interest rate risk due to the price of the actual bonds held in those bond funds. So that might be something to look into. You might also want to look into fixed income alternatives today. There are other places that can act as a bond alternative for you that might actually give you a higher rate of interest with some type of principal guarantee accompanying it. And in addition, there's also, I think today is the day that we begin to look at active money management again, where we want to be a little bit more actively managing that portfolio. When we see the market get to these heights that it's at today, typically there's more volatility in the future. We see pullbacks, we see corrections, potential crashes, and in those times we want to be more active in our money management and not as passive, not as buy and hold. We're seeing individuals such as John Bogle at Vanguard, the founder of Vanguard, really the founder of buy and hold, is telling us that we need to be cautious today and maybe be carrying a little additional cash and maybe even be a little bit more active than we have in the past due to current market valuations. So you've got a lot to think about today, Sam, and I'm glad you're thinking about interest rates. I'm glad you're thinking about bond funds. If you own bond funds and you're not sure about this relationship they have with interest rates and what might happen in the future, it's time to sit down and get a real education about what all those numbers mean and what the real risks are to your overall portfolio.
All right, thanks for the question, Sam. We're going to move ahead to an email from Charla in Granger, Indiana. She writes, I'm a divorcee with a small aging home, and I would like to get something a little nicer. However, I'm not sure what I can afford. My current monthly housing expenses run around $500 per month, and a mortgage would increase my costs only slightly. However, I'm 67 years old. Is it irresponsible to get a 30-year mortgage at my age?
Well, I'm going to say it's Charla. I actually had a conversation with Charla here not that long ago, so I know I had made the same mistake. I thought it was Charla. We had Charla here on the show, and Charla had called in, and she wanted to go through this, and I saw her email. We ended up having this conversation about getting her this mortgage, and the reality of her situation was that she was single. She wasn't concerned with what she left behind. She had enough enough, income to cover that mortgage for the rest of her life, and she wasn't real happy where she was living. And so what we decided we wanted to do was, why not get a mortgage? She said, well, I'm 67, a 30-year mortgage, I'll be 97 by the time that I get the house paid off. I said, who cares, right? Who cares if we end up being 97? You're probably never going to make it to 97. You'll never pay the thing off. But what happens is you're not leaving debt behind. You're still leaving an asset behind for the next generation. So when you pass away, the kids are going to do what? They're going to sell the home, most likely, or they assume the mortgage. But most likely, they're going to sell the home. The equity in the home takes care of any debt that's on the home, and you get to enjoy retirement the way you should. I think the risks in doing this are when you take a mortgage so that you can invest it in some place where there's high risk, high reward opportunities. I want to make sure if you're going to have a mortgage in retirement, which is not something that we want to have during retirement. I do subscribe to the Dave Ramsey philosophy there. I would rather be debt-free. But when it comes to this situation, if we've got enough guaranteed income to take care of that mortgage payment, by all means, enjoy retirement like you were meant to. It just sometimes means you have to sit down and get a full analysis of all your income sources to make sure that's really the smartest thing to do.
There you go. So, Dina, you're up next from Fort Wayne. Go right ahead.
My husband and I inherited a large amount of bank stock. It now makes up more than half of our net worth. It lost a lot of value during the financial crisis and never came back entirely. We depend on it for income now and want to diversify, but I'm not sure we can justify the tax consequences. How should we manage the stock moving forward?
Well, Dana, it really concerns me that you have over half your portfolio in one individual stock. We never want to hold any more than 5% in any individual company that we have in our overall portfolio. And sometimes we will have a little leniency for someone that can either afford the risk, or maybe it was inherited, they have some personal attachment to it. Maybe we go as high as 10 or 15% of the portfolio, but 50% is entirely too much. And so what you have to do is really weigh the difference between the tax consequences and the risk that you're taking in with your overall retirement plan. Think of it this way. For one, you've probably got long-term capital gains there, so you've got preferential tax treatment on that position. Let's say that it was $1 million position at a $500,000 cost basis. Now, when you sell that thing, it's taxed at long-term capital gains rates. So those rates are actually a very important thing to keep in mind for a lot of individuals out there. They may be taxed at 0% today. If you're in the 10 or 15% bracket, you may not have to pay any taxes in order to exit a portion of that position. Now, beyond that, it might get as high as 20% if you're in a very high income bracket, or you're generating a large amount of capital gains, and as high as 23.8% if we're incorporating Medicare surtax as well. So let's say we had $1 million position, $500,000 cost basis. You've got $500,000 in gains. Let's say that those taxes are about $100,000. Now, that $1 million position only needs to move 10% to the downside for you to justify having those taxes and going ahead and paying those taxes today and securing the dollars that you've worked so hard for. So don't let the tax tail wag the dog here. It sounds like you've done very well, and sometimes when we make money, we've got to pay the piper. But if you're already in a position where even after you pay your taxes, you're still in a great spot, and you can now live the secure retirement that you really want to without having to worry about what that stock's going to do day to day, regardless of how well that stock's done in the past. We see companies like Lehman Brothers. We've seen stocks that are even with major banks that have not recovered since the 2008 financial crisis. So don't take unnecessary risk, and don't let the tax tail wag the dog.
We have a special offer now for the next 10 people who call the office at the number on the screen. We're offering a complimentary review of your entire financial and retirement plan. It's an opportunity to sit down and get a better understanding of what it's costing you to work with your current advisor. We'll begin work on a tax strategy so that you can keep more of the money that you earn, and then develop a lifetime income strategy so you can relax and really enjoy life in retirement the way it's supposed to be, without worrying about where's the income going to come from. So for the next 10 callers, we'll hope you'll take that opportunity to sit down with Casey or a member of the Howard Bailey team and start your own purpose-based retirement. Okay, our question of the week now has to do with interest rates, since that's what Casey was just mentioning a moment ago. What year were the interest rates the highest in the last 50 years? Casey has the answer when we come back.
Let me help you create the retirement you dream of. Go to my website and pick one of 3 education options to get started today. Get a copy of one of my retirement planning books, sign up for a Purpose-Based Retirement live event, or go to the Purpose-Based Retirement University. 2 days of college-level retirement planning instruction. With the right education and proper coaching, I believe anyone can create the retirement they dream of. It all begins with one step. Visit thepurposebasedretirement.com.
You need a plan to create the retirement you deserve. The first step is to tune in to the Purpose-Based Retirement Radio Hour with Casey Weade and Marshall Johnson. Saturdays at 11 a.m. and Sundays at 1 p.m. on WOWO 107.5 FM or Sunday mornings at 11 on 95.3 MNC.
So how did you do with our question of the day? It had to do with interest rates. Looking back over time, the question was, what year were interest rates the highest in the last 50 years? Casey?
Well, Lee, the answer is actually 1981. And back in 1981, 10-year U.S. Treasuries were paying 15.3%, believe it or not. If you wanted to get a 30-year mortgage, you'd be paying 18.5% in interest. And if you just wanted a 3-month CD, just a 3-month CD, you'd be getting 14% FDIC insured. But some things have changed just a little bit over the last few years. Now we find ourselves in one of the lowest interest rate environments in history, and interest rates have been a little bit on the rise. We've seen some increases over the last year or so. So what does that mean? Is it time to go very short on your individual bonds or buy longer term CDs? At what time do you get back in? And what type of risk does this pose to your overall investment portfolio? If we go back through over the last couple hundred years and look at the fluctuation of interest rates, one of the things that's really going to stand out is this peak of interest rates that we saw back in 1981. While 10-year treasuries have averaged 5% a year over the last couple of years, from 1981 till where we find ourselves today, we've seen a declining interest rate environment, and that means something to bonds. That means bonds have done very well over the last 30 plus years, and this is when most financial advisors and most baby boomers really started their investing. So living in a rising interest rate environment could be a completely different world for both investment advisors and investors themselves moving forward. So let's take a look at what it looks like inside of some of those individual bonds and some of those bond funds and what those risks might actually be. If we take a look at a falling interest rate environment, we get to see that we benefit from the price return. As interest rates fall, the price of bonds rises into the future. So both bond funds and individual bonds perform relatively the same. Their total return, meaning both the income that they pay and the price that they get to see in fluctuation, is higher than just the income that's being generated from those bonds. Now, if we see a flat interest rate environment, we see something where, again, both bond funds and individual bonds end up acting relatively similar. We see price return being flat and income return being flat, total return being equivalent to income return. Now, if we see a rising interest rate environment, something we haven't seen in the last 30 plus years, now we see something very different, especially on the bond fund side. On the bond fund side, we see prices begin to fall and we see income begin to rise. However, the total return ends up being less than the income return on those overall bonds. And if we buy individual bonds, this is a point in time where we can get more predictability out of our portfolios. If we eliminate our bond funds and maybe think about trading in some of those bond funds for individual bonds, now we see price return remains flat and income return increases over time. Our total return equals our income return. Now, if we go back through over the last 50 plus years, we will see what actually happened through the 50s, 60s, and 70s as interest rates were rising. What was happening to 10-year bonds? We found that the total return of 10-year bonds was 2.2%. Their average coupon or average interest rate was 5.6% over that period of time. So we can see the total return was less than the income from those bonds. Now, if we begin to see a falling interest rate environment, we see that the total return is 11.3%, average coupon 6.9. That's what we saw through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And during that period of time, this is why that old 60-40 stock and bond mix did so well over the last 30 plus years, because your equities were performing very well through the 80s and 90s. And we also saw your bond funds were performing exceptionally well at the same time. Now, right now, you may be waiting on bonds and interest rates begin to turn around on those bonds and on your CDs. While you sit in cash or stay short term, you may be losing out. So what is that break even? How fast do interest rates need to rise in order for it to make sense for you to go a little bit further out and buy a longer term CD or a fixed annuity for that matter? Let's take a look at a chart. If we went out today and got a 5-year fixed rate of 3% per year with a $100,000 deposit, after 5 years, our $100,000 would be worth $115,000. Now let's say that you stayed short and you bought a CD for 1 year only, and let's say it paid 1.24% per year. That would be about the highest 1-year CD rate that you could get today at 1.24% at the end of 10 years, with a 0.5% increase in interest rates every year. And every year you renew that CD, at the end of 5 years, you now have $111,700. Now, what if we see more than that, a 75 basis point or 0.75% increase every year in interest rates? Now, again, still at a 3% yield over the next 5 years, our 100 turns into 115. And even with almost a 1% increase in interest rates every year, we're still falling short of just getting that 3% or 3.5% or better that we can actually get today. So with no annual increase, you missed out on $9,500 in income or interest over the next 5 years. And if we end up like Japan with decades of low and flat interest rates, you might end up in this position. That very well could happen. Number two, if we have a 0.5 point annual increase, you lose out on over $4,000 in interest. Keep in mind, this is only a $100,000 investment. If we see a 75 basis point annual increase, which is a massive increase year over year, we see a $1,400, almost a $1,500 less if you're buying that 1.24% CD today versus that 3% or 3.5% fixed. And if we have to see increases of 1% every single year for you to see an actual gain, and only a $1,300 gain over a 5-year period. So here are some things for you to consider. Number one, what type of interest rate risk do you have? Number two, can you eliminate much of this risk that you actually have by maybe trading out some of those bond funds for maybe fixed instruments, and that can give you a principal guarantee and give you an equivalent return? Number three, how much interest do you actually need to be successful? Maybe we only need to make 3 or 4% in order to have the retirement that you really are looking for. And lastly, do you know all of your options, or are you just stuck working with a broker that only wants to show you stocks and bonds?
So I'm going to guess that unless you're working with somebody who really has a broad picture view of what's going on in your portfolio, the answer to those questions is probably not.
Probably not.
That's why I think it's great to be one of the next 10 callers to call right now. We're offering a complimentary review of your entire retirement and financial plan. We're going to break that open and take a look at exactly what the fees and expenses are you're paying your current advisor. We'll begin to develop a tax strategy so you can keep more of what you've saved. And then we'll take a look at a long-term income strategy so you can have that confident retirement you so richly deserve. So please be one of the next 10 people to pick up the phone and call right now. Casey and the team will make time on the calendar to sit with you and give you your very own purpose-based retirement. Well, that's all the time we have this week. We hope you'll be back next week for another edition of the Purpose-Based Retirement.